everybody. I'm John Leslie, and we are talking about radio. And to show you the kind of quality guests that we have on this program, Kevin Ankeny is our guest from Queensbury, New York. He is a professor at the State University of New York, SUNY Adirondack. Kevin, good morning.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. And my official title is Broadcast Media Production Professor. But usually we just shorten that to broadcasting.
Okay. There really aren't many. Here's me. I'm all set to say something that I'm not even sure about. I'm just guessing that there are fewer and fewer broadcast curriculums in schools today.
I would agree that the traditional concept of broadcasting has been surpassed by media production and a lot of angles that include social media. But you'll still find them. They're maybe not as prevalent or heavily promoted as they were 20 or 30 years ago, but they're still around.
Now, you have a history in commercial broadcasting. And as I understand, you were in Erie and Altoona and Johnstown.
Yep, Western Pennsylvania. I was a kid growing up around Pittsburgh, and I guess like a lot of kids in the late 70s and early 80s, fell in love with radio because that's where the content was. Today people are spoiled. They can watch their favorite baseball team every night all summer long. But as a kid, the home games were never televised and you could only hear them on the radio. And I just fell in love with the visual created by the play-by-play and color commentators. And that was really kind of my first introduction to the possibility of a career in broadcasting, although I initially set out to become a print journalist, and then a whole bunch of planned accidents happened and I ended up here.
Well, that was a lucky accident.
A lot of lucky accidents, for sure.
Well, I also grew up in the shadow of Pittsburgh and started my radio career in a little town in the northern panhandle of West Virginia, Weirton, West Virginia, which was
sure, Weirton.
Yeah,
they had phenomenal football teams at Weir High back in the 80s.
No question about that. A lot of athletes came out of the Ohio Valley, and many of them out of Weir High School, and even the Catholic high school that I attended for a few years, Madonna High School, had some great athletes. And I started my radio career in Weirton, and then down to Wheeling, and then I ended up in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, at WBVP very early on. And I'm sure you're familiar with Beaver Falls.
Oh, sure. That's Joe Namath's hometown.
Absolutely. And this is really your time, but I got to tell you the story. When the Pittsburgh Pirates Baseball Network was on the air with Bob Prince, was the play-by-play announcer for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and our FM transmitter in Beaver Falls was the newest and most powerful FM transmitter in the area, even better than some of the Pittsburgh FM stations. So we became the primary link in the Pittsburgh Pirates Baseball Network. We would get the feed from Forbes Field, send it out on our FM transmitter, and then all of the other, I don't know, a couple of hundred stations, I guess, around the tri-state area would pick up our signal and carry the Pirates. So anything that was done in any mistakes that were made in our studio were heard on the entire Pittsburgh Pirates Baseball Network. And there was nothing worse than being the board op on a Sunday afternoon, having to sit there for a doubleheader because there was nothing to do other than play commercials. You couldn't leave the room because you never knew when they were going to call for a break.
Right.
So one Sunday, I went into the production room and I got the sound effects record. And the sound effects record, all of them that we all had in our stations, had the sound of a home run being hit. The crack of the bat and the crowd going crazy. Well, one time I queued it up and slip cued it at that baseball or the home run sound, probably a grand slam. And Bob Prince said, "He swings and misses," and I let it loose. Crack! And the crowd goes crazy. And I sent it out. It went out to the entire baseball network. So were you a disc jockey primarily, or what did you do?
Well, coincidentally, my first paid job was between my junior and senior year of college was board opping Pittsburgh Pirate baseball games on a 1,000 watt daytime AM station, and typically they would sign off at sunset. But in the summer, with the baseball games, they would continue to broadcast after sunset, and so they needed one more set of hands to keep the station on the air. So I was hired to board op Pittsburgh Pirate baseball games, and that was my first paid job. And my real break came because I got to do a live 30-second weather forecast once per game in the bottom of the seventh inning, and that was how I kind of got into this gig. But I went to college actually to be a print journalist. My uncle was a reporter for the Detroit News, and I thought he had a really fascinating job. So I was kind of headed in that direction. And my freshman year, I stopped in at the college newspaper, and it happened to be the night they were putting the paper together, and there was a lot of chaos and I guess you could say frustration on the part of some of the students, and I just didn't like that vibe. And the next day, in my mass comm class, a kid named Bruce said, "Why don't you come to the college radio station and hang out with me?" And he became a very good friend, and I kind of started down the path to becoming a broadcaster instead of a print journalist. So I did work in radio for 10 years, primarily on air. I did some news, typically smaller stations where people would go on vacation. They would shift me over from on air talent to doing the news. And I did spend part of a summer selling advertising for a newspaper right out of college while I was trying to get that first full time radio gig. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything.
Our guest today is Kevin Ankeny, and he is a professor in broadcast media production at SUNY Adirondack. This program is downloaded all over the world. We have listeners in Ghana and England and Germany, and they may not understand what SUNY is. Could you explain the concept of SUNY Adirondack and how that came to be?
Sure. So SUNY is an acronym for State University of New York. There are 64 campuses that are at some level funded by the state of New York. So it's really the second largest public university system in the United States. I think California has the largest. New York is number two. Of those 64 campuses, about half are four-year institutions and master's and doctorate institutions, and half of them are what used to be more commonly known as community colleges, but that idea is changing. So we Adirondack are one of the two-year campuses or community colleges. So we're sponsored by two local counties, Warren County and Washington County. So we're located halfway between Manhattan and Montreal. So it's a 3 hour drive to Montreal, 3 hour drive to Manhattan, and about 3.5 to Boston. So we're just at the base of the Adirondack Park and the beautiful Adirondack Mountains. And the college started in 1961. So it's not one of the early community colleges, but I would say came in kind of in the middle of the community college phase in. And the college has grown significantly in the time that I've been here. I think they've built maybe 4 buildings, and right now they're working on a really big synthetic turf athletic complex that will be multi-use for baseball, softball, soccer, lacrosse at some point, and also be available for use for the community for tournaments and camps and all those kinds of things. So the community colleges really have changed in terms of the plan. Originally, they were to help students get from high school to 4-year colleges with some technical programs, and now they're really driven by what industry needs. So in this area, it's a lot of advanced manufacturing, and nursing is a big program here, and broadcast has been part of that since the 1970s when they had originally it was more of a radio electronics course, but as technology changed, they phased that out and made it more about production and on-air experience.
You're pretty well thought of by your students. I'm looking at some of the comments. You get highly rated. One student says, I'm about to graduate from broadcasting, and Kevin has easily been my favorite professor each semester. Let me see this next one. Awesome professor. He got me interested in all of his classes, and he made them hands on fun. Those are kind of nice things to hear, aren't they?
It is, but I think it's fair to say that I bring a lot to the program, but the program itself is a very hands-on, engaging program. Students generally come in with an interest in doing some type of media production. Maybe they've done some video stuff with friends, or um, they consume the media. They watch television, they listen to radio and podcasts and those kinds of things. So they come in maybe with a higher level of enthusiasm and engagement than a student who's taking general education classes because at some point they want to be an attorney. And so I will take some credit, but I think a lot of the credit just goes to the content. I mean, it's fun for sure.
It seems that over the years, the people that I've been associated with and uh, have had there's a higher level of energy and enthusiasm in the broadcast industry than perhaps other industries generally. The, there's a passion that's present, and all of the people that I interview on this program talk about that passion, and they talk about when they were 10 and 11 and 12 years old, they were had a transmitter, a little transmitter in their bedroom, and they would lay there with their transistor radio and listen to the faraway stations, and couldn't wait to get their opportunity to get into the broadcasting business. So I feel a much higher level of interest in some aspects in broadcasting than perhaps other professions.
Well, I tell students that it's not just a profession and it's not just a job. It's a lifestyle. One of my on-air gigs was overnights at a 50,000 watt station in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and that becomes a lifestyle. You have to decide on your day off: are you going to stay on your overnight schedule, or are you going to be a normal human being and sleep at night, which then throws off your sleep schedule for a few days. So I think with that and the fact that it's a 24/7 business and has been for a very long time, that you're expected or likely to be working on weekends and holidays. So it becomes a lifestyle. And if you don't embrace that lifestyle, it's probably not the career that is going to serve you well for a very long time.
Yeah, and the people who don't have that latent interest in the business don't stay in it very long. They try it and then go off and do something else. But you were
Right.
able to parlay that interest into the ability to help others probably decide whether this is the correct career path for them. Is
Right.
are there opportunities out there for broadcast graduates today?
There are. I think it's important for students to look much broader than just traditional radio television careers, because there's a lot of media content that never comes across somebody's television, at least not through a TV station, and the same with radio. And we find that students from our program, and it's only a 2 year program, so a lot of times they're competing with people who have an additional 2 years of experience in a bachelor's program. But our students tend to find jobs creating content for businesses. For example, in Saratoga Springs, there's an antique dealer and appraiser, and he has one of our graduates creating video content for him. And another recent graduate works as a news photographer for one of the TV stations in Albany. So that I think students, if they're motivated and have some passion and some talent, they can still find their place. It may not be at a radio station, but it's still creating content. I have a student who works for a local news website, and he does podcasts for them because of his audio production background. So I think there are lots of opportunities, but if you're looking only in the want ads for radio stations and TV stations, you may be limiting your opportunities.
Kevin Ankeny is a professor of broadcasting at SUNY Adirondack, and he's our guest today, and we're talking about radio. The you have a student run radio station.
Correct. Yep.
Tell us about that.
1977. As I mentioned, it went on the air in 1977. It's really kind of an anomaly because it's a Class D FM, and the FCC discontinued that Class D license a while back. But because of the number of radio stations in the area, our proximity to the Canadian border, and in the days of analog Channel 6 television in Albany, we could not find another frequency that wouldn't interfere with uh, the audio from Channel 6, or a frequency that wouldn't violate the rules between the agreement between the United States and Canada. So we ended up getting basically a grandfathered permission to remain on a commercial frequency, 92.7 FM, where we should be below 91.9.
Isn't that
So we're a
interesting?
10-watt. It is. And there are only a few around. One of them also is at Plattsburgh State University, one of the four-year campuses in SUNY, and they're I don't know, maybe 30 miles, 40 miles from the Canadian border. So they're kind of in that same situation. We ended up getting the grandfather to stay at 92.7, and we're 10 watts. So now those low power FM stations that are popping up around the United States have more power than our station that went on the air in 1977. We do 24/7 broadcasting year round because we use automation like commercial radio stations, but we have a group of students on the air every semester. Before COVID, we would probably be somewhere between 15 and 20 students in the fall, and around 12 to 15 in the spring. We're below that now, but we're slowly working our way back up. And I think part of it is we're just starting to see more students come back to campus to be here for full-time classes.
Well, Kevin, what kind of programming are you offering?
Uh, our official format falls between alternative and AAA, adult album alternative music, but students can play their own content, and we also program some reggae and blues and bluegrass and
That's
classic rock. So if you have a friend with very eclectic music taste, and you borrow their device, their iPod or their Spotify account, it's going to be like that. And then the students bring their own mix. So I had a student a few semesters ago that did like show tunes, which was out there a little bit, but very fun. And a few years ago, a student came up with this great idea. He did the really great like North Atlantic accent from like the 1930s and 1940s of radio, that very kind of staccato delivery. He mastered that. So he did his show. He called it Blue Jay Radio. His entire show was music from the 30s and 40s, and he would research events that happened on the day that he was doing his show, but 50 years or 60 years prior, and he would do the news as if it was actually happening. So he would be talking about World War II as if it was in the present tense. It was phenomenal. Way, way, way more than I could ever expect anyone to do. He spent probably 5 to 6 hours a week planning for a 2-hour show.
well, that's what makes you successful. Show prep. All
Exactly.
successful
Yep.
people prepare their programs.
Right.
Now you just
And
had
this kid just knocked that out of the park.
you just had in last month a retro nerd fest.
Actually, it's happening next weekend,
Oh, okay.
April 15th.
Hey,
Yeah, this is it's not really a radio event. It's an event that the radio station is hosting. We bringing in a dozen pinball machines and vintage arcade cabinet machines like Pac-Man and Frogger, and we've got some local record vendors, new and used vinyl records, and we're going to set up DJ booths to spin vinyl during the event, and we're going to do Super Smash Brothers Ultimate video game tournament. And yeah, this thing has kind of taken on a life of its own. And it really came out of the club trying to figure out a way to engage the campus and the community. And we just started looking at all the things that people like to do and said, why don't we put them all in one room for about 6 hours and see if we can get people to show up. So we've gotten a pretty good response, and I'm optimistic that we'll have a good turnout.
It sounds like the students on your campus enjoy being involved in these kinds of events.
That's fair, yeah. The athletics the basketball had a very good season, and they started to get a pretty good crowd as they progressed toward the playoffs. And there are a lot of student clubs. COVID, I think, was a big setback, and coming out of COVID, students really didn't know how to mingle and socialize. But I think that has kind of gone behind us now, and now it's foot on the gas, full speed ahead with a lot of fun activities on campus.
There are probably people in Los Angeles, California, who are going to be listening to this, and they have absolutely no idea that the Adirondacks of New York exist. They may have heard of it, but they don't know what it's all about. And as I understand, one of the reasons that you are where you are is because you like that region. And people that I know who live there love the Adirondack region. What is it there that's so attractive?
If you love nature, if you love hiking, canoeing, kayaking, snowshoeing, skiing, camping, it's a huge playground. It's bigger than Yosemite National Park. It's bigger than Yellowstone, and it's just a different lifestyle. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania and spent some time in Pittsburgh, so a small but metropolitan city. And I also grew up in a small town, and I could go back and forth and be happy in either. But as I started to get older, I really enjoyed small town life, and that's what you find in the Adirondacks. And when I was interviewing here at the college, my wife came with me, and we were staying in town at a hotel. And people we met were transplants from New Jersey and Long Island, and they said, "You'll love it here. People move here and they never want to leave." And that's true. The snow is a trade-off. If you don't like outdoor winter activities, winter can be a little bit long, but we don't have hurricanes and we don't have tornadoes very often at all. We don't have earthquakes. We get snow and then it melts and life goes back to normal. So if you enjoy the outdoors and just the scenery, the beauty, it's amazing. One of my favorite places is about an hour, 15-minute drive north, the home of the 32 and 80 Winter Olympics. Lake Placid is just a beautiful mountain town, and it's almost like being in an alpine village in Switzerland. And because of the proximity to the Canadian border, we get a lot of French Canadians that are tourists. And you can sit in a cafe and you can look at the mountains and you can see the lake and you can hear people speaking French and you feel like you're in Europe and not in upstate New York.
Well, one of the best ways to feel like that you're in Europe and not be there is to go to Montreal. You would
Right.
you
Yeah.
would swear that you're in somewhere in the middle of Europe.
Right. And if you go a little further north, if you go up toward Quebec City, then you really feel like you're in Europe.
One of my last television assignments before I retired was in Lake Placid. There was a devastating ice storm had gone through there, and it would have to have been in the late '90s, I guess. There's a little town up there, Keene, and a couple of other towns around Lake Placid. And I was sent on a television assignment to go cover not the ice storm itself and what damage it had caused, but my job was to do a story on the National Guardsmen who were there opening up the streets and taking out all of the timber that had fallen. And we actually stayed with the Guardsmen in Lake Placid. They were stationed there when they did this work, and it was very interesting. And the local community was so grateful to the National 204th Engineering Battalion National Guard for coming in there and literally opening up that whole area so that their lives could return to normal somewhat.
Yeah, the weather can be harsh. I think that might have been before I moved here, but I think it might have been 1996. There was a pretty significant ice storm. Parts of the Albany metropolitan area were without power for days, if I remember correctly.
It may have been, yeah, 96, something like that. All of the trees were just, it was like somebody went through with a big chainsaw and chopped them all off. I remember back when my nephew was in college, and he worked at their college radio station. And he sent me a tape, and he said, "Would you critique this? What do you think?" And I listened to it, and it was a typical college radio station with probably at that time very little supervision. And my only response to him at the time was, "You don't have to be funny every time you open the mic, or at least you don't have to try to be funny."
I think there are young people who want to release their inner comedian, and I think it's important to remind anybody, but particularly students, that you are performing for the audience. Your goal is to provide content and entertainment for them, and sometimes that includes entertaining yourself, but sometimes you have to focus more on what may work for the audience and less on what works for you.
We're getting close. Excuse me. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I talk so often with my guests about that time when local radio stations were so very important to the local community. They were on everywhere. They were on. The local station was on at the barber shop. You went into the hardware store, or the 5 and 10, and the local radio station was on, and people looked to the local radio station to provide them with the information that they needed. Not only school closings, but any emergency activity, fires or accidents or whatever. And the local stations took that as a great responsibility and fulfilled that need. And it has changed now so much, insofar as there are so many sources of information that it makes your head spin. I look at my Google News feed in the morning, and if there are 100 philosophies, you can find 100 stories that track with your philosophy. Well, I am certainly pleased that you had an opportunity to talk with us. I'm glad that you are in the business of helping educate these young people who want to get into the communications industry. It's at a new point in history. It obviously has changed a great deal, but it is a new point in history. And then the people entering at this point need to be well educated and instructed on how to do it properly. And that's obviously what you are doing. And
Right.
I salute you for that. Now, you grew up in the Pittsburgh area. Are you a Steelers fan?
Steelers, Pirates, Penguins.
Okay.
It's hard to be a Pirates fan these days, but I grew up black and gold, and Pitt Panther football and basketball. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I was really Lanny Fratteri, Bob Prince when I was very young. Then Lanny Fratteri was the play-by-play announcer for the Pirates for more than 20 years. And I had the opportunity to meet him on multiple occasions when I was working for Pirate baseball affiliates, and just solidified everything that I thought about the importance of radio at that time. And I think it's evolving and it's changing, but it'll continue to find its place in that mix of media, because great storytelling and great entertainment will always survive. It'll transfer to the web, it'll transfer to podcasts, but audio is still really a big part of the entertainment mix, even though people think more visually. And when we talk about media, we're always thinking about movies and TV and YouTube, but audio only podcasts are huge. And so thank you for bringing these stories about radio to the world.
I'm enjoying it. I thought when I retired from the business that would be the end of it, that there would be nothing more for me to do. My former business partner has been after me for a year to start a podcast, and it has just, I have guests from all over the world who are requesting to be on this program, and I'm really looking forward to continued success with this. Well, Kevin Ankeny, I thank you very much for being with us, and we're going to put up, when I post this at the hosting site, I will link all of the appropriate links to SUNY Adirondack and to the radio station, so our listeners can track over there and take a look for themselves.
That's great. I really enjoyed our conversation, and for your listeners haven't listened to every one of your podcasts yet, they should block off a few hours and get started.
Thank you, Kevin Ankeny.